So, hi, welcome. I am Elizabeth Finlayson of the Nonprofit Coach, and today we're going to be talking about Giving Tuesday, yay or nay. Is this something that we want to be participating in, or is it something we should pass? So, as I said, I'm Elizabeth Finlayson. I am the CEO and the lead coach of the Nonprofit Coach, and our mission is to create a fairer and more equitable world that is filled with empathy and beauty. And we do this by supporting our nonprofit clients through coaching, strategic planning, fundraising and board training, and through group support sessions. So I want to talk a little bit about the services that we are offering. So for instance, we have coaching packages where people can work with us, work with a coach, and they can get feedback on their fundraising for a little more than an hour per year. We have an online grant writing course if you're looking to kind of improve your skills in that way, that's available on the website. We do major giving programs, there are capital campaigns. We have an executive director support group that is part of these regular bi-monthly webinars. And you can see there's many things that we do here, and I talk to you about the online training. You can find those at YouTube. And with that, we're going to keep going. So I want to put this in context for you, these bi-monthly webinar series. These are free webinars that were created out of the pandemic. At the time, I realized that we were going to lose a lot of good nonprofits. This will have been the third recession that I have fundraised through, and I thought it was really important that we got information into the hands of nonprofits, particularly small ones, as quickly as possible. Since then, they have grown into a regular series that we do twice a month. And that the idea is we either focus on a general topic overview or we dive into a really specific slice of a topic. And we have guest speakers. They are not meant to replace any kind of paid training or work that you do with another consultant or coach or with us. They're just to kind of keep that information out there and sharpen your skills. So let's actually talk about what is Giving Tuesday. It is typically the first Tuesday that is after Thanksgiving. And, they define themselves as being a global generosity movement that's unleashing the power of a radical generosity. I think it's really interesting is that there's a lot of focus on the fundraising and the donations, which I think makes sense as a fundraiser and as a nonprofit, but that's not the limit of what it is meant to be. It is actually meant to also have people think about what are they going to do for their neighbors? Are they going to visit an elderly neighborhood or help bring their mail to them? Are they going to volunteer that day? So while from the nonprofit side, we've had a lot of emphasis on actual donating on that day, and it's developed its own giving culture, that just to realize that it's actually part of something bigger. And that the other thing is that while they know that we know them as that specific day, as an organization, they're a global movement to inspire generosity every day of the year and build capacity within the social sector to leverage generosity and improve communities. So that is a quote from Woodrow Rosenbaum of Giving Tuesday, and it was created in 2012. So I think it's important that we understand the broader context. At the time, there was Black Friday, and then there was Cyber Monday had started to develop, and then there was that question of hey, could we do something around generosity? And that's how Giving Tuesday began. I think it's as important while we're thinking about yay or nay to participate or not is to know that globally $2.47 billion was raised on December 31st last year, or sorry, that should be December 1st last year, so Giving Tuesday last year, and to just know that we're part of that philanthropic landscape. We want to know, is this something that we want to pass on those dollars? Are we afraid that our donors are going to be going to some other organizations on that same day? So it's really important to just understand the scope of it when we're figuring out if we would like to be part of Giving Tuesday or not. So I also think as we're thinking about, do we want to be part of Giving Tuesday, that is really helpful to understand. Again, we know that it started in 2012. So this is Woodrow Rosenbaum, and he's the Chief Data Officer of Giving Tuesday. And he mentioned that Giving Tuesday is a movement. It continues to grow year over year in donation volume, reach, and impact. They have a nice little chart on their website where they really show how that has really grown quite substantially over the 10 years that they have been around. So it's important to understand that not only has it brought in a lot of dollars last year, that this has been a growing and increasing trend over this time. So while we consider whether we want to or do not want to participate, we need to be thinking again about how does this fit into the broader world of philanthropy. So I don't normally like to put big quotes on the screen, but I have a couple of them in today's webinar, and that's just because I think there's a few important things to say. So this actually came from an article that Woodrow had done around this time last year that was talking about the myth, well, he was framing it, the myth of donor fatigue. And I think one of my favorite things that I picked up along the way is that the idea of donor fatigue is often just a projection of fundraising fatigue. Is that as a fundraiser, we are tired of saying the same things over and over again, or people have phrased to me sometimes like, I'm tired of having my hand out all the time, I feel like I'm begging. Those are the kind of things that can lead into the feeling of donor fatigue when the research on donor behavior is often different. So one of the things he talked about here is what was working during, as they say, crisis moments or also like on giving days that isn't activated other times. And he references this research by Sector 3 Insights that goes into how we affect donor behavior. So what are the drivers of donor behavior? And so one of them is a sense of urgency. Then there's emotional connection, familiarity with supporters, and that are benefiting from the organization's work. So with disaster relief, all of those things become really clear. Like urgency is very, very clear. The emotional connection that can happen, seeing families' homes be destroyed, those kind of things can drive donor behavior. But the research also shows that nonprofits do not do a good job of communicating these during regular times of the year. And urgency, in this case, as he's saying, doesn't have to mean it's an emergency. It just means there's a compelling reason to act now. Giving days become that compelling reason. So that is why I think they've often been very effective in drawing more and more people towards that day. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So while Giving Tuesday might be fabulous for somebody else, it may or may not fit for your organization. And so I think it's important to kind of look at what are the things that make it effective or not, and why we want to participate. I think we know that every activity that we do as a fundraiser or as a nonprofit employee, it's taking time from something else. If we're doing Giving Tuesday, are we not calling our major donors? Are we not sending a different appeal? Are we not planning that event that we think is going to work? Are we maybe not actually going and spending time on the programs because as a staff person, we're doing more than one area of the work? So that makes it become even more important to really just know if this is a good plan. I wanted to kind of stop and just kind of take a moment to check and talk about 2020 and resiliency. And that is one thing that I like about Giving Tuesday is that they're really great about sharing the insights and the research that they develop out of that time. And why this is important is when we're going into this fundraising season and this year end and Giving Tuesday is we're not in a vacuum. We are in this very interesting time. And we're also coming off of a very interesting year. So let's kind of just pull this apart a little bit and see how this may affect your organization. One of the things that happened last year was there was unprecedented donor mobility. And what that really means is that organizations were jumping from donors were jumping from one organization to another. And there was a lot of that. And you might think about your own behavior or people that you know, maybe they heard about nurses raising money at a local hospital and they ran to that cause, or they knew that their local food bank really needed some food then and there just wasn't enough there. And everyone ran to that. There were all kinds of reasons. There were different, George Floyd, right? People might have been rushing over to social justice causes or Black-led organizations. So there were so many things that were happening last year that were pulling them out of regular patterns. And then you can think for our own habits. Many of us were sitting at home. Many of us were not spending money on the things we would normally be spending money on. So while we knew that our neighbors and our fellow citizens and people around the world might have lost their job and they might have been suffering. Maybe we actually had more money than usual. Maybe there was money in the stock market, or maybe we just didn't take that vacation we planned on. And so people were feeling guilty too. And that was driving some donor behavior. So there was all of this change going on. And so what happened was that donations overall were up. So there were more dollars that were given last year. I hope that you on this call were one of the people that actually benefited from that. It's really interesting to see who did and did not benefit from that. The growth in the number of donors was up. So one of the things that happened last year is just patterns broke. So if the number of donors has been consistent in the United States over a very long period of time as a certain percentage, that just changed last year. We saw a lot of new donors that were coming in. But again, we saw people changing which organizations they were supporting. Also, in that change, recapture of lapsed donors was up, and that's really hard to do. So that's, again, donors reevaluating their patterns, but renewal of existing donors was down, and that's where people were flooding back and forth. And so you can see, who are these winners and losers? And we're going to get into this a little bit more, but one really obvious place you can see these distinctions, if you were Health and Human Services and you didn't have a funding model that relied on people getting together. So if you weren't, say, getting lots of people into a ballroom for an event or doing a really large walk where everybody was together, if you weren't affected by that, but you were in Health and Human Services, your organization would have done better than other organizations. On the opposite end of the spectrum, arts organizations did not do as well, right? Their whole model is about getting people together in community. And now if they were able to pivot and to make other choices, that's great. But if they were not, they would have really been challenged to fulfill their actual mission. And so these are the types of disparities we saw last year. This is something that as a fundraising consultant and coach, I just really want to make clear to people, and it's clear in the data too. And it was clear last year as people in my profession were speaking to organizations, is that we knew the research was coming out that donors were more interested in giving than they were before. And organizations were saying, oh my gosh, we can't ask people for donations. Nobody wants to hear from us. Nobody wants to give. How could we ask people right now? And the organizations who followed that line of thinking did very poorly last year because they weren't fundraising. And the organizations that continue to ask for donations were actually doing quite well. And so this is another place we see this huge disparity in how organizations did last year. Now, why do I say all this? Who cares? What does this have to do with Giving Tuesday? Well, if you are an organization that experienced some of these contractions, maybe your donors went over to Health and Human Services, or maybe you were able to recapture a few lapsed donors, but you know that you need to get some of your the current donors you had that are now lapsed, you need to get them back. Or maybe you were an organization that had to pivot several times and there's a communication gap between you and your donors, that they're maybe not as clear on your mission. These are all things that are going to be important as you think about your Giving Tuesday plan and going into year end. How are you going to retain the donors you have? How are you going to capture your lapsed donors? And what do you really need to be communicating at this time? So we're going to step away from 2020 and just looking at Giving Tuesday. And when we're thinking about this, kind of like the yay and the nay of like who does well with Giving Tuesday, a few things to just understand is that large organizations have typically been better able to capitalize on the attention of that day. So I would imagine for those of us who are asking the question to be involved, maybe didn't have a Giving Tuesday last year where it was such an obvious thing that they would redo it. So you want to see, large organizations are doing really well. Other organizations, which may be the same or maybe different, or organizations that have really great social media programs, they're able to communicate quickly, they're able to get attention, they're able to engage an existing group of people that may or may not be donors and maybe help them become donors. And if they were a large organization that also had a robust social media program, they were very well poised last year and in previous years to take advantage of Giving Tuesday. I would also add to this something that I think is not maybe teased out in the data, but I think we've seen again and again, is organizations who are willing to be creative and experiment. If you think about the things that have really taken off in fundraising beyond just people's interest in the mission, you think about like ice bucket challenges, or the ones where they've locked the executive director in a dog cage or crate, and until they make a certain donation amount, they get let out of the crate. Things like that are attention getting. And while I don't necessarily say you should all go lock up your executive directors, or if you're an executive director that you get locked up, what I am saying is I do think of Giving Tuesday as an opportunity to sometimes change tone a little bit. Just like we have a particular tone we use when we're writing our grants, that's more formal and academic. And then we have another tone we might use in our direct mail letters or emails that's less formal than our grants. And then when we go into social media, it can be even less formal than that. I think we can think of Giving Tuesday as a little closer to that social media level of informality. And I don't think you need to necessarily think like, well, our brand is very, very serious, and therefore we can't be creative. I think if you're not willing to be creative on Giving Tuesday, it is a real disadvantage. And I wouldn't let formality take you away from creativity. You can think about, there are organizations that have incredibly serious missions or things that are sad or can make people angry, and you can still find a really creative way to either make that mission land with other people or to get them to think about the work differently. So it doesn't have to be silly to be creative. I just want to be clear about that. It can be, but it also should be something that would stand out. I do want to really be serious about disadvantages. I definitely was a Giving Tuesday skeptic as it came up when I was in the middle of my fundraising career as it currently stands. And it is one of those things where, for instance, there's a lot of organizations communicating on the same day. We often had a really strong year-end plan, and this felt like it could disrupt that, or we'd be competing with ourselves in some ways or competing with other organizations. Because of the emphasis of it being one day and the creativity and having a fundraising goal for that day, there could be an overemphasis on one-time gifts, or donors should just come in, they make a donation, and they're gone. Those donors, they're not going to have a long-term impact on the organization. And it can be dangerous to spend a lot of time on one-time donors versus donors that you're going to continue to gauge beyond that. Additionally, when we have an emphasis on social media, obviously having social media would be an important part of that strategy, that social media is not necessarily a great place to fundraise. It is great in all kinds of ways, but you don't get a lot of dollars really traditionally through social media. And so when you have a giving day and you have a lot of focus on that, and if you're doing most of it or all of it through the social media platforms that you're using, that can maybe not be as effective as using some other strategies. So these are all the disadvantages. And where this really comes into, and it's the unspoken disadvantage, is the cost of time, right? So we know that we're going to dedicate, if you're a fundraiser and it's Giving Tuesday and you're operating in Giving Tuesday, that whole day is going to be that. You are not writing a grant. You're not likely to be talking to a major donor unless they're talking about Giving Tuesday. And so there is an opportunity cost, and it's important to do that. It also takes planning, right? You need to be thinking through what you're going to be communicating about. What is it that you're creative about? What's the goal? How often are you going to communicate? What channels? So there's a lot of work that can go into it, and you want to make sure that it's paying off. So let's talk about the advantages. We talked earlier about urgency being a driver of donor behavior. So this is just an opportunity to have urgency, right? And that can make a difference. One of the things that was not in any of the Giving Tuesday communications this year that I saw, but I had heard Woodrow Rosenbaum speak about at a previous conference, is that one of the things that Giving Tuesday believes is why Giving Tuesday has grown over these years is that donors have a desire to be part of something bigger than themselves. And as nonprofits, we're not always good at doing that. We're good at talking about our organization, our impact, and what we do, but we have a harder time connecting it to a broader community or a broader theme or idea. And so this is something that allows donors to be part of something bigger than themselves. You can imagine that last year in 2020, people really were desperate to be part of something bigger than themselves, as for a lot of us, our worlds got a lot smaller. The other thing is we know that communicating with donors through multiple channels, whether it's social media, letters, email, phone, etc., create stronger donors and prospects. Giving Tuesday ends up being a great place to do that. So you have a whole day set aside for additional communication. You know you're going to be using social media. You're probably going to be using email. So it's one of those places where it's an opportunity to strengthen that bond with your existing donors and prospects. We just talked about all that donor mobility in 2020. And so this is where, again, looking at this year, this might be the place where you say, our goal this year is going to be focused around new donors or lapsed donors. Like, how are we getting these back? Or how are we going to really grow and get some of our social media audience onto our email platform? The other thing that's really interesting is that it is an opportunity to expand your donor revenue streams by focusing on small and mid-sized donors. So if you are fortunate enough that you had major donors and they were loyal to you and they stayed with you, or you had them and you saw some go and one or two major donors leaving even for a year can make a really big difference to how your organization functions. Having lots of small donors really can add up and create a great base of stability for an organization. And so this might be one of the ways that you're doing that. I often coach all my clients, because most of them are small, to focus on looking at what do you already do, that if you're going to do something new, how do you build them in together? So if you already have some type of goal, you might look at Giving Tuesday and say, we knew we wanted to get our mid-sized donors up. We knew that we have a hole there in our donor portfolio. Let's focus on that goal for Giving Tuesday. Okay, what plan and strategies work with that? So really kind of targeting what you want to do. I think sometimes, particularly when we're smaller, but as nonprofits, we can scattershot our activities in a lot of directions, and we're not necessarily being the most effective in that place. This is a question that comes up again and again with organizations that I work with, whether it's specifically about Giving Tuesday or really any year-end activity, where people will really have a concern about all the other organizations that are communicating at the same time. So I think one thing to just be realistic with each other when we're talking about Giving Tuesday is to really just understand that, like, yes, there is a potential for your message to get lost with other organizations. There are a lot of organizations communicating on that same day. We've talked about the advantages about donors wanting to be part of something bigger. There are also components we may be afraid that our donors are going to run off to some other organization that sees a Giving Tuesday message and then not come to us. But we just have to realize it is going to be competitive that day. Sometimes organizations can handle that by actually being collaborative. So maybe they'll go in something together and say, these 5 organizations around the same theme or idea will pick a goal together, and then they'll split the donations that way. So there are ways that you can actually make it more compelling and more interesting. But I do think we just need to be realistic about the fact that it is true. There is a lot going on. And the question I would really ask myself when we talked about creativity is, what can I say that makes my organization stand out? And I actually mean this less as a competitive question, although it is, but also I think there's a question there about what needs to be communicated to my donors that hasn't been. I often find working with organizations, there's an aspect of the mission that donors don't understand. Maybe you work for an organization that has, say, 10 programs, and people don't even know about 1 to 3 of those programs. And maybe there's one program that's really highly identified with the organization. Maybe it's an opportunity to focus entirely on one little understood or little known program and just get the messages out about that all day. I would also say, let's not forget that Giving Tuesday is not just about donations. It really is about generosity and volunteering. So you could ask yourself, well, what could I be doing that's helping to create a more generous community? How am I helping my donors feel more connected? How are we helping people to get together? So could there be a volunteer component? Could there be some other aspect to it that doesn't just get it, stuck on clicks and donations? So those are all things that can help you with the fact that, yeah, your message might get lost with other organizations. So let's look at the flip side about that. People are looking for Giving Day messages. With each year, Giving Tuesday becomes more known to a larger group of people. Obviously, it's well known in the philanthropic community. It's well known to people who are already following organizations. But there are Giving Days also create a lot of new donors, people who have never given before or they've never given to that particular organization. And also, your donors might actually be looking for your messages that day. They may already know they're going to be doing something on Giving Tuesday. And if you're not in that feed, you just may not be the thing that's happening. And people want to give to their favorite organization. So the thing we have to remember about our donors is they're not thinking about us as often as we're thinking about them, and that's perfectly fine. So if we're not allowing ourselves to be top of mind, then we just may not make it onto the roll for the year, or maybe they'll get us later after they've made a different donation. So not to scare you into doing it, but just to kind of realize like there's two sides to that, to the fact that there's a lot of communication and emphasis on that day. I do want to talk about Giving Days in general. Like, are they a good idea? How do they fit within the sector? And I think it's interesting. Like I said, I started off as a Giving Day skeptic, and I've really come around from there, particularly as I've seen it working with some clients that are in communities that have a really well-known, well-participated Giving Day for their community. So there's a couple organizations I work with, and the Giving Day in their area is in May, and everybody knows about it. Everybody participates in it, and it creates a lot of generosity. It has a lot of visibility in their community, and it creates a lot of not just donations, but donors, right? How are we creating a generous and philanthropic society? Giving Tuesday acts like that for the whole world, and they're looking to get bigger and bigger and have more and more people participating. But I think it's interesting to think of it as an opportunity. Now, if you, let's say, looking at the clients that I know that have their Giving Day in May, it does affect donor behavior, right? So now you're expecting large chunks of donations to be happening in May. That will affect how donations around year end look, right? So you're creating new behaviors by these new structures, but it's really important to kind of see how they fit into things. So we just talked about creating a culture of giving, not just how do we get donations for our particular organization. This is an example that I found when I was preparing for this. I thought was really, really interesting. And this is from the Knight Foundation talking about, so the Knight Foundation and Miami Foundation created the Give Miami Day. And I thought some of the statistics around it were really interesting that I wanted to share. So it made history as the most active 24 hours of giving in the Southeast United States. I think that's really incredible. So with the number of nonprofits, donors, and dollars raised increasing year after year. So you see that same pattern of increased engagement over time as it becomes more recognized. So it talked about in 2016, the Give Miami Day brought in close to 25,000 donations from more than 17,000 donors around the world, raising $9.1 million for 600 plus local nonprofits. So, and then their point was that the impact extends well beyond those 24 hours. I think what we want to know is that Giving Days are not going away. So I always think with when I look at Giving Tuesday and I look at organizations, and I don't think every organization has to do it, but I do think it has to be talked about. You really have to plan and see how it fits your broader plan. See how it fits what you're planning for year end, see how it fits your event schedule. I know some organizations have events close to this time of year. For some places, you're going to be looking and saying, Giving Tuesday is the only thing I'm going to do at year end. And for some people, they're going to be looking to do a really robust plan, or they're going to focus more on December itself or the end of December. You know, I'm a fundraiser. I know that more fundraising is better. So, you know, what was that? I just heard this really great quote. I thought was hilarious. I should find it. But, oh, I know, it was the head of Habitat for, or the founder of Habitat for Humanity had stated that he had tried raising money by asking for donations and not asking for donations, and asking for donations always won. And I think it's something we just need to remind ourselves when we're feeling reticent, scared, tired, whatever those pieces are. It doesn't mean Giving Tuesday is the right strategy for you. It could be one of the strategies. And if it's not Giving Tuesday, I really encourage you to look and say, what is it? What is the giving strategy for you for this time of year? There are some really great resources. Giving Tuesday, I think, does a great job of sharing graphics and toolkits and data and stories, and there are webinar recordings and all kinds of stuff that's on there. It can be helpful to register your nonprofit with Giving Tuesday if you are going to participate. Facebook typically has a very large match on Giving Tuesday, which is gone within minutes at the beginning of the day. But these are all things that you're going to want to look into as you're planning your year-end fundraising. So I'm going to stop now, and I'm just going to ask for questions in chat, or you can unmute and ask your question. Hey, if questions come up, we're going to keep going. And then I may, since we're actually done a little bit early, I may actually create a time where we can take off the recording, and I'll let you kind of ask questions. I know sometimes people feel a little bit more comfortable that way. If you're interested in contacting the nonprofit coach for services or getting to know a little bit more what we do, you know, there's a lot of free resources on our YouTube channel, and you can find things on our website. But you can also reach out through the email address and phone number that's on the screen, 312-340-0460, or for services at thenonprofitcoach.guru. And I want to say thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Oh, we have one chat question. Great. So somebody asked if this will be provided, if a copy of this video can be provided. Actually, yes. After each of these webinars, we send out the video on the email list. So if you signed up, you should get that. And I am going to end our recording now.